Welcome to a very special series presented by GayTalkRadio.org and QueerPublicRadio.com. In this series, Gay Talk Radio and Queer Public Radio will feature the complete audiobook Invisible Hand, written by Larry K. Mason. Although this audiobook is a fictional account, it could be true. Mr. Mason has designed this concept of a completely new monetary system which would, by itself, catapult the world into a caring, loving environment that we have all dreamed of. To explain his concept, Mr. Mason wrote this book and provides it for free on the internet. Mr. Mason decided to write this book, Invisible Hand, to explain the new system he proposes, which has the ability to change our world as we now know it. With his permission, Gay Talk Radio and Queer Public Radio present this wonderful concept for your listening pleasure and serious consideration. For more information, you may visit Mr. Mason's website at nopom.info. That's NOPOMINFO. nopom.info. On with the show.
Invisible Hand, Chapter 6, Passage, in which Clark goes to Washington twice. Things come to a head, and Lozelle leads the Granny Brigade. Thursday, November 4th, 2010. Dear Mama, Frobisher did it. He won the election. Somehow, despite the polls saying we were 20 points ahead, I never really believed he would do it. But the people really like him now. They really think he can get the country out of the mess we're in. You know, they are saying that it's all because of me. That's right, Mama. Frobisher, Mr. Ormond, Doris, Ed, all of them are saying that it was my idea that did it. All I did really was tell them about this new money thing I found on the internet. Of course, I did have to do some research on it, so I guess I understand it better than the rest of the guys, but still, it really wasn't my idea to begin with. Wasn't Buddy mean to do all those ads for Constable? I mean, they were just lies about Frobisher and our bill. There isn't any truth to him saying that the bill is just a communist front. We also won lots of seats in Congress for candidates who support the new money idea. There are at least 75 congressmen who made the campaign pledge to support this bill exactly as it is. Huey says we may need to convert enough other votes to be able to overcome a presidential veto. He says the only way we can do that is to get a huge grassroots movement that forces their representatives in Congress to go along with us. So they gave me the job of teaching people on the website how to convince their neighbors and friends that this is the way to go. Anyway, Mama, they're going to keep me on Frobisher's staff. They're paying me real well, too. They want me to work on getting people to support our bill when Congress comes into session. They say I am really important. I don't really think it's true. I mean, Ed writes ever so much better than I do, and Doris seems to know just what to do to get media coverage that says what we want it to say. Huey seems to know everybody in Washington. Mostly, I just put things on the 10 Points webpage. Whenever there is anything in the news or on the internet that spreads lies about the 10 Points, I put up a page that exposes it and shows the truth. You know, Mama, I am beginning to think this new money stuff can really work. I mean, it's just like when I was little and I would do something nice or help you in some way. You would give me a treat or give me a big hug and tell me that you were proud of me, or let me go to the movies. That's all this new money really is. It's just rewarding people for being nice. Why can't people see that, Mama? Anyway, we are moving to Washington this week, and I'm going to have an office right there in the building with all the other congressmen's staff. I bet Buddy didn't think I could do it. So I'm feeling fine and eating better. I've even lost a couple of pounds. Ed says it's because I'm thinking harder than I ever did before. Doris thinks it's because I walk to work and lunch these days. Well, I do have a car, but gas is so expensive that I would rather save the money for other things. So ever since Buddy cut off my allowance, I've been doing a lot more walking. Doris says all the girls in Washington will want to date me, but Doris says she will protect me so you don't have to worry. That was a joke. Mama, I am so excited and happy. I know things are going to be tough, and I'm going to have to work hard and be careful to be smart in everything I do. Huey warned us that if anybody with Frobisher gets even so much as a parking ticket, they will use that to attack the bill. So we all have to be really careful to be above suspicion. You needn't worry about me at all. I'll be very careful. Your best boy, Clark. P.S. Do you like the Frobisher campaign stationery? I dictated this letter into the new word processor, and it did all the typing and stuff for me. We can't use the stationery anymore since the campaign is over, so I'm not stealing anything from anybody. It's just going to be thrown away if I don't use it. Lozelle held the letter close to her heart. Clark is doing so well, she thought. I have to help him. I'm going to find out about this new money stuff myself. Betty had bought Lozelle her own computer for email with friends and use of the Internet. She had no trouble finding her son's campaign website. It wasn't long before she was reading the sections which encouraged readers to spread the word and build support. There were directions for holding new money parties and for finding others who had seen the light. There were instructions for how to introduce the idea to someone who had never heard of it, and there were arguments given to use to refute the lies they could expect to be told about it. By the end of the day, Lozelle was planning parties and practicing the new greeting sign, which was a raised right hand with index finger extended, while the thumb and the other three fingers made an O, thus representing the number 10. The 10 referred to in the 10 points of the bill that was to be passed unchanged. When Lozelle went shopping the next morning, she mustered up her courage and flashed the 10 at a few people. Most seemed not to notice, but a few gave her a big smile and flashed it back at her. Thus encouraged, Lozelle bought party favors and other supplies and invited half a dozen of her friends to tea on Thursday. Then she plunged into the website to find out how she was to convince the others of what they had to do. Know your audience, it said. Different people are suffering from different problems. If you understand their problems, then you are halfway home. What problems did her friends have? April had a teenage son who was a drug addict and was somewhere on the streets, only heaven knew where. Melissa had parents who were in failing health, and their medical bills were crushing. Marge hated her husband but was afraid to leave him since she had never worked and had no idea how to take care of herself. So she was miserable most of the time and suffered from depression, and had even tried suicide a couple of times. Okay, but what does that have to do with the new money? She pressed on. It seems that the drug addict depended on buying drugs from others. With the new money, there would be no way for the boy to pay for the drugs. No pay meant no drugs. For Melissa's parents, there would be no medical bills, since the new money was only used for buying luxuries. Money that could only buy luxuries? Fancy that. Maybe I'd better read that bill Clark wrote. Well, that can wait until later. Marge could afford to leave her husband, and even take the kids if all their needs would be met without her having to pay for them. Maybe there was something to this. Thursday, November 11, 2010. That was a disaster. They all made fun of me. Nobody believed that I knew what I was talking about. April even called me a communist. I just can't do this. How can anyone do this? Oh, Clark, I've failed you. The phone rang, playing Rock of Ages, because Betty said it was the only rock music he liked, and with a lump in her throat, Lozelle managed to get out a passable "Hello?" before she lost the power to speak at all. "Oh, Lozelle, I just had to call." It was Melissa's voice. "I felt so bad for you with the way the others jumped on you. It really isn't a bad idea, and I just had to call and tell you that I thought so. I was scared to say anything with the others all being against it. I'm not a brave person, Lozelle. I just couldn't face having them treat me in the way they were treating you." By the time Melissa's voice had tapered off into an embarrassed silence, Lozelle found the lump in her throat was gone. In fact, things weren't so bad after all. "Melissa, thank you so much for calling. That was the act of a true friend. I'll always think fondly of you for being so kind to me. Calling me took courage too, Melissa. I think you're a lot braver than most people." "Oh, no, I really am a scaredy cat. I don't know how I mustered up the courage to pick up the phone. If I didn't have you on speed dial, I don't think I could have." "You know, Melissa, I think where I went wrong was in having so many people come who didn't really understand what I was trying to say, and they were too embarrassed to admit it, so they just attacked the thing that seemed strange to them. I think that next time I'll just invite you and one other person, maybe lunch instead of dinner, and make it more informal. Then when I say something about the new money, you can jump in quickly and say how you agree and so on. That way they'll be the one alone, and we'll have more trouble disagreeing. We'll have to be careful not to seem to browbeat them or get angry at them if they disagree. Remember, we're trying to get them to understand and join us." "Yes, I know just what you mean. I can say something like, "You know, I thought that too at first, but then I found out, or I realized that," or whatever. That way we can seem sympathetic and make it easy for them to change their minds. I mean, most people don't really understand what they believe anyway. Yes, well, I was thinking that we might invite Patricia. She's been angling for an invitation anyway, and we can try out our technique on her. It wasn't really that easy, but after a couple of weeks, Loiselle had made contact with quite a few others who were also trying to spread the word. When they could, they brought in speakers with more formal credentials and invited friends to meetings of 20 or 30 people, some of whom were already convinced and others whom they thought might become convinced. Buddy, of course, knew nothing about Loiselle's activities. So long as she was present when he wanted her there and was a gracious hostess when he needed one, he really didn't pay much attention to her. Besides, Buddy had his own problems. He was one of the leaders of what was still a rather disorganized opposition to the new money concept, and his own business was suffering. The price of oil was substantially depressing soybean activities all across Buddy's empire. His other investments were suffering as well. He had not yet reached the point of blaming everything on this new money idea, but he was afraid that a recovery would be delayed by it. As a result, Buddy's temper was short, and he was apt to authorize steps which, in more normal times, he would never have considered. The campaign, so far as Buddy was concerned, was about to get dirty. Buddy wasn't the only person who found the new money concept unpalatable. There were certain, shall we say, ungodly persons whose income depended upon the contributions of the faithful and devout. The specter of those contributions coming to an end was not one which left them unmoved. There were thundering orations from several pulpits which portrayed the new money as the work of Satan. Congregations were informed in no uncertain terms that to support such evil was to doom one to everlasting torment. Also, on the other side of the moral divide, were those who made a living from cash transactions, untraceable, under-the-table, cash-on-the-barrelhead transactions. At first, the organized crime bosses paid no attention to what was a laughable idea at best. But, as soon as the movement began to flourish and elections were being decided by support for the idea, a few looked into it enough to realize that, at least until the silly idea was dropped as unworkable, their illegal activities would be brought to a halt. If one can't give money to someone else, how would extortion and prostitution and illegal drug sales be conducted? You can't run a big business on the barter system. All the big money-making activities of organized crime would become virtually impossible. Sure, a group of guys could get together on Friday night to play poker, but the losers would have to buy things for the winners rather than giving them currency. That's no way to run a casino. Bankers, stockbrokers, and insurance executives were likewise aghast at the prospect of a bill that would appear to put them out of business at a stroke. Lawyers were getting nervous. How would a suit for damages be possible if the respondent couldn't pay damages to the plaintiff? Worse, how could the lawyer get his cut? No, Buddy was not alone in his opposition to the new money bill. But despite the wealth and power of his allies in the struggle to suppress the new money idea, it was difficult to find logical arguments against such emotional issues as no taxes and full employment, and an end to the welfare system. How did you convince a divorced mother with 3 small children that being paid for taking care of her own kids was a bad thing? How did you tell a retired minister and his wife that their retirement money would have to be used for medical care instead of those pleasure trips which they had never had time for before retirement? How would a poor graduate student in the humanities receive the word that she would spend 40 hours a week working in the food service industry so she could stay alive while trying to carry a full course load instead of getting all those necessities without paying for them? It was hard not to come across as a greedy SOB to oppose child care for all needy children. So the opposition was forced to say that, though it sounded nice, it was too good to be true. They had to make the case that somehow, though how was not obvious, somebody would be losing money to pay for all these things. The ancient truth, there is no such thing as a free lunch, got frequent mention. Somebody has to pay for it. This 10 points bill is just a confidence game, a trick, a scam. It's based on lies, lies and more lies. Don't be taken in. Only a fool believes that such things are possible. This was the theme. Somehow, though, they couldn't specify any particular person who would pay. Now, if you were going to make the case that the idea is just a trick, then you need to show that those who are behind it are bad people, that they are just doing this to steal from others somehow. So, of course, those who were out front in the campaign to get the 10 points bill passed came under close scrutiny. Congressman Frobisher was portrayed as a mere pawn in the control of moneyed interests. His past supported this charge since, among others, Buddy had received no few favors from the congressman and had, by coincidence, made substantial contributions to the congressman's re-election. and Frobisher's reputation in Congress as little more than a fool didn't support Frobisher as the brains behind the movement. The search for the guiding force continued. The congressional supporters of the bill began to ask, rhetorically, how they were to benefit from the bill, since the bill allocated no money. It was hard to see how Frobisher or any of the others who had been elected on the 10 points pledge could benefit financially from the passage of the bill. And if the bill passed and proved the disaster that it was predicted to be, surely they would be thrown out of office at the next election. Rumors started, no one knows how, that it was all a scheme of the Jewish bankers to somehow gain control of the financial resources of Wall Street. At the same time, another rumor maintained that it was an Islamic plot to destroy the Western world's economy. Both rumors suffered from the facts of economic life for the vast majority of Americans. There didn't seem to be any point in trying to take over a failing economy, and it didn't seem that there was any need for an Islamic conspiracy when things were going to hell anyway. The price of gas continued to increase, and the supply of heating oil was once again becoming a major concern all across the northern states. Inflation was over 10% a year, and interest rates were over 20% for all but the most highly favored of borrowers. Unemployment was officially over 15% and growing each month. Bankruptcies and business failures were becoming so common as to be considered routine. A walk through almost any mall would show many empty storefronts. Depression was the emotional mood of the day for most people. It seemed that the other dominant emotions were inspirational hope by the 10 points advocates and the anger of deep fear on the part of its opponents. Inspirational hope proved to be by far the stronger lure. "We can do this" became almost a national saying. It was with this explosive mixture of emotions in the air that Christmas arrived. It was a strange Christmas in many ways. There was not much to celebrate in most homes. The usual stresses of the holidays were often magnified by the loss of jobs and worry about where the next meal was coming from. Churches in northern cities were having meetings to find warm places for families of their congregations whose own homes could not be heated. Even in large cities, the smell of wood smoke was common. The visiting of the elderly became a serious affair, since many had already succumbed to hypothermia. The president was on television promising better times just ahead. "It's a Wonderful Life" was being shown far more than usual, and Clark decided to risk a visit home. Thursday, December 23rd, 2010, back home in Macon. "Oh, Clark, it's so good to see you again." Lozelle threw her arms around Clark and almost cried from relief. Clark hugged her and grinned down at her happy face. "It's good to see you too, Mama." He put his motorcycle helmet down on the small table in the hallway and took off the leather jacket he was wearing. "It's good to get out of the cold. I had no idea that riding a cycle in the winter was so cold." "A motorcycle, dear? What are you doing riding a motorcycle? Did something happen to your car?" "No, Mama, but I work for Congressman Frobisher, and I can't be seen as wasting gasoline by driving a car these days. That's why I took the train to Atlanta and rented the bike. I parked it out by the back door. I hope it's not in the way there." "That'll be fine, dearest." "My, don't you look handsome and grown up? Somehow I don't remember you looking this way before you left last summer. What have you been doing with yourself?" "I've been working at a computer a lot and walking everywhere the rest of the time. I have a 3-mile jog to my office each morning, and I walk around doing errands and such, so it's about 5 miles of walking going home. If I jog in, it's warmer that way." "I suppose that explains why you look so fit. Are you getting enough to eat, dearest?" "Mama, I'm fine. Tell me how you are. I've hardly heard from you these last 5 or 6 weeks. What are you doing these days?" "Mostly I'm campaigning for the 10 points whenever I can," Lozelle said, flashing Clark the hand gesture of the 10 with a grin. "Mama, you haven't! What does Dad say about you doing that?" he said, gripping her upper arms. "I don't think he knows. I've been trying to keep him from finding out, and he hasn't said anything about it, so I'm sure he doesn't know yet. I guess it's only a matter of time before he discovers it, though." Lozelle's head drooped and her face lost its smile. "Where is he? Is it okay to talk about it here? Do the servants know?" "We had to let most of the servants go. Buddy says it's just till the economy gets better. We closed off most of the house to keep from heating it, and so we really don't need that many. Anyway, LaShonda knows, but she would never betray me." "Is Dad home now or at work?" "I guess he's at work. I haven't seen him for 3 days. He works such long hours these days. Lots of days he doesn't get home until after I've gone to bed, and he's up again before I am. The only time we get to talk sometimes is over breakfast. I guess he's away somewhere on business. I tried calling him at the office, but they just say he is out. I think he's hiding from me, and I don't even know why. But tell me how things are going in Washington. Are you doing well?" "We're doing a lot better than I'd expected. We were going to try to coordinate a national movement, but it's sort of gotten away from us. I don't think we have hardly any control anymore. It seems like each of the other congressmen and the few senators who were elected on this platform each have their own campaign back home in support of the idea. We tried to give them some direction, but they just seem to think they should be in charge. It's mostly just one big babble. We here are rather well organized, I think, Lozelle said proudly. We bring in speakers and we have discussion groups. We're using a lot of the selling techniques for this idea that work to sell cosmetics and dishware. We have little parties and church groups that meet and discuss the 10 points. Some of the churches, though, call us bad names. We had one group parading last Sunday in front of our church with signs saying we were Satan's church for supporting the new money. We went out front with signs saying, well, quoting the Bible, you know, suffer the little children, and even as you have done it unto the least of these, and loaves and fishes. They got mad, but they went away. Good work, Mama. We can't tell very well how we're doing, but we have picked up several congressmen due to the pressure from their home districts, so we figure we must be doing some good. Have you looked at our website? I'm responsible for most of that. I've been reading it almost every day. We based a lot of what we're doing on what you put in there. We especially like the question and answer part where you answer questions that people are likely to have. I've been able to stop several hecklers in their tracks with answers you put there. That was Doris' idea. The hard part was getting all the questions. Some of them seem rather odd, but they're all questions that real people have asked Frobisher, or there was a crash in the entryway. Clark led Lozelle from the sitting room back into the hall and found Buddy half in and half out of the house, lying over the doorsill. He was a mess. His clothes were rumpled, his hair was disheveled, and his face bruised. As they bent over him, they heard a car engine rev, and a dark shape accelerated down the curving driveway to the street. "Buddy, Buddy, what's happened? Are you all right? Oh, Buddy, dearest." By the end of her exclamation, Lozelle was almost crooning as she went to her knees and held Buddy's head and shoulders on her lap. "I'm home, dear." Buddy got up with a crooked grin before he closed his eyes with a grimace. "Dad, what happened? Who did this to you?" Clark said, having returned from running down the driveway trying to get a better look at the car. "Let's get him inside. We can ask all these questions later, Clark." "Right, Mama. I'll get his head and shoulders, and you get his feet after I pick him up some." Clark took Lozelle's end of Buddy and, with his arms around Buddy's chest, got him into a sitting position, and then, with a grunt, was able to get him almost to his feet when Buddy roused enough to help some. Between Lozelle and Clark, they managed to lift and steer and half carry him into the sitting room and lay him in one of his lazy-boy chairs. Lozelle called for the maid. "Lashonda, Mr. Minton is home and we'll need some food. Make something light but nutritious because he's not feeling well. Oh, and make some hot coffee, too." "Dad, can you hear me? Are you injured? Do you hurt anywhere?" As if by magic, Buddy roused. "What kind of a damn fool question is that? I hurt all over. If I was injured, your moving me like a sack of potatoes would have done me in, you dang fool. And if I couldn't hear you, what are you asking questions for? What do you have for brains, boy? Grits?" Lozelle looked relieved. "Buddy, he was just worried about you. He's trying to help you. Do you need a doctor?" "No, I don't need a doctor. I just need a week in bed. I haven't slept in 3 days, and I've been beaten up several times, so I feel like I've been playing football on a bad team." "Who did this to you, Dad?" "You should know. It's your fault I was kidnapped. You and that damn money idea of yours. They thought I was the brains behind the whole thing. If I hadn't been able to prove I'd been fighting this thing right from the beginning, they'd probably have killed me." "But do you know who they were, the police?" "They were hired thugs. They never let me see their faces. The police won't be able to do anything. Besides, they said they'd get Lozelle next time if I went to the police. We'll leave the police out of this." "Well, who hired them then? Do you have any clues as to who's behind it?" "They could have been hired by almost anybody, son. Do you have any idea how many toes you're stepping on with this crazy idea of yours? You got some very powerful people really mad at you." "I have some ideas. Organized crime, banking, insurance, even lots of preachers see the end of the gravy train. I guess everybody who thinks that the job they do is worthless or harmful doesn't like the idea." "You think what I do is worthless, boy? You think your daddy is some kind of a monster?" "Oh, no, Dad, I didn't mean that. I just meant that people who feel like the way they make money is worthless would be opposed to it since they wouldn't get money for it anymore. Soybeans aren't worthless. They're good food." "Well, there's lots of good people who think this trash you're spreading is dangerous, and I'm one of them." "I'm sorry to hear that, Dad, but I can't help but point out that the men who kidnapped you were hired. They were paid money for what they did. With the 10 points money, that couldn't have happened. There would have been no way to pay them except to give them goods. Those goods could have been traced right back to the people who gave them." "Boy, will you shut up about that crap? I don't want to hear about it from you." "Yes, Clark, let him rest now," Lozelle said soothingly, hoping to calm Buddy. "Okay, Mama, I'll see if I can give Lashonda a hand in the kitchen." Clark left, and Buddy settled down in the chair again with a pained look. Lozelle kneeled beside him with her arm across his chest and her head on his shoulder. She began to cry softly and told Buddy how afraid she had been while he had been gone and how glad she was that he was home again to take care of her. Christmas Eve, 2010. The next day, Clark visited his father in his office, where Buddy was trying to find out what had happened to his business while he had been indisposed. Buddy's taste was for dark, massive wood furniture that looked like it had been handed down from the ancestors for several generations, and the most modern in desk accessories. Clark was a little hesitant, since he had always been forbidden the privilege of coming in while Buddy was busy, ever since his father had learned of his intended college major. "Dad, may I talk to you for a few minutes?" "Sure, son. What is it?" "I spent most of the night thinking about our situation. It seems to me that you're just as vulnerable today as you were yesterday when you were in their hands. There's also Mama. They could hurt her or kidnap her next time. Do you have any plans for what to do to protect Mama and yourself?" "Yes, I do. We're going into hiding." "Where?" "I haven't decided yet. I've been thinking about some place in the mountains, but obviously we can't very well use our cabin because they'll know all about it. I don't have enough money to just head up there and look for something when we get there." "Dad, why don't you come back to D.C. with me? It's easier to hide in the city than in the country anyway. I can get you an apartment, and we can pay cash. It'll be like you just dropped off the face of the earth. In a month or two, the bill will have passed or failed, and none of the POM people, that's physical object money people, you know, people against the 10 points bill. Anyway, none of them will care about us anymore then." It took several hours of argument in which Lozelle and LaShonda took a hand, but it was finally decided that they would go to D.C. rather than hide out in the woods. Buddy was still reluctant, but the fact that he gave in at all showed that he was really shaken by his experience. The problem of how to leave without being traced was solved by Lozelle. Much to the surprise of both Buddy and Clark, Lozelle said that the move to D.C. would be no problem, since the We Can Do This organization often had to move people without their being traced. Clark, who supposedly was in the inner circle of the movement to pass the 10 points law, had no idea that such things were going on. Lozelle let him know that there had been efforts in several cities to stop the support for the law that extended to beatings, arrests on trumped-up charges, and it was rumored there had even been a couple of killings. The local organizations had come up with various means of moving people about the country without use of common carriers. Buddy and Lozelle left the house, lying on the floor in the back of LaShonda's car, while Clark went back to Atlanta by motorcycle, following a different route than when he had come, and by train back to D.C. from there. Buddy and Lozelle went by 18-wheeler, riding in the sleeper cabs of 3 different rigs. They finally found themselves taking a cab to Clark's neighborhood, getting out at a seedy hotel just a few blocks from his apartment, about 10 on a cold but sunny Tuesday morning. They waited in the coffee shop, which gave a good view of the street, until they saw Clark walk past the window. Then they paid their bill and left by a side door, at which Clark, now driving his car, picked them up. "How you doing, Mom? You look tired," Clark asked. "I want a bath and a nap, but I think I'll be fine after that. It's all very exciting, you know." "Have you got us a place to live yet, son?" Buddy asked. "Well, I have a place for you to spend the night at least. That'll give us some time." The place turned out to be the apartment of Rose Miller, one of the top organizers of local support for the 10 points bill. Rose's husband was adamantly opposed to the new money, in part because his job within the government, the Federal Trade Commission, would become meaningless with the new money. In an effort to keep peace in the family, Rose chose to hide her activities in support of the 10 points bill. Thus, she had leased an apartment in the district from which to conduct her campaign. Rose and Lozelle hit it off right from the beginning. It wasn't long before Buddy felt like the odd man out as Lozelle and Rose got deep into a discussion of strategies, but at least it meant that there would be no question whether Buddy and Lozelle would have a place to live while hiding in D.C. Wednesday, March 9th, 2011. The 10 points bill was being brought before the House for a vote. Interest in the bill meant that events were being followed closely by all the networks that carried news. Cameras were everywhere, both inside the Capitol buildings and outside, where the crowds were huge. Both sides had tried to rally the troops, so to speak, but the numbers favoring the bill were far larger than those opposed. Police lines surrounded the houses of Congress, but there were no police between the palmists and the new money supporters. There were insults traded, and things were threatening to get out of hand when what would later be known as the Granny Brigade formed up. Facing the palmists' most aggressive section, mostly young toughs hired to start trouble, hoping to show that the new money faction were really violent revolutionaries. The police had been alerted that the new money people would probably try to storm the Capitol, and that they should be repulsed even if it meant shooting into the crowd. The grandmothers, dressed in skirts with silver and sometimes blue hair blowing in the breeze, advanced upon the toughs at a slow walk. At first, the toughs gave a little ground. Then one lost his head and pushed one of the ladies. She fell, and the others began screaming and waving their arms. A few canes lashed out, and more than one can of mace was discharged. Almost before one could think, the toughs were attacking the grandmothers. Naturally, this was being shown on TV, and the police guarding the Capitol were frontline spectators, but not for long. They broke ranks and charged the mob. The police being armed with shields and clubs, the toughs had little chance. But some toughs were more heavily armed than others, and some had guns. Shots were fired, and several people went down from bullets. Meanwhile, the crowd of New Money supporters seized their opportunity and surged to the very doors of the Capitol building and through. The quiet halls of Congress, where only lobbyists and power brokers disturbed the stillness, were invaded by a horde of middle-aged women and their mothers. They began chanting, 10 points, and we can do this. The bill never reached a vote that day, but it was the turning point of the campaign. The video of young toughs attacking grandmothers on the street and then shooting at the police was played again and again on the nation's TV screens. When the news broke that the toughs had been hired by organized crime elements to oppose the bill's passage, it only added fuel to the groundswell of support. Thursday, March 10, 2011. Clark visited his mother in the hospital where she was recovering from a broken arm and a concussion. Her recently acquired friend Rose was already there. "Come in, Clark. Your mother's awake now." Clark approached the bed on which his mother lay resting, her head bandaged and left arm in a cast over the elbow. "Mama, why did you do it?" "Son, I couldn't ask other women to do what I was unwilling to do myself. Someone had to be willing to get out front. At least I'm better off than some of the others. 3 of us died. Others will never fully recover from their injuries. I came out of this okay, except for a headache and this funny arm. I'll be fine. You just do your part." "Clark," Rose put in, "this putting the grandmothers in the front lines was your mother's idea. She did the networking and organizing that got them assembled and to the crucial part of the crowd. She kept their courage up and led by example. You should be terribly proud of her." "Rose, I am proud of her, but it still hurts me to see her like this. I would never have let her do it if I had known." "Why do you think I didn't tell you before, Clark?" "You didn't tell Dad either, did you, Mom? Dad was in the Palmas part of the crowd. He's okay, but he's pretty shaken. Would you like to see him? He's just outside." "Of course I would. Why didn't he come in with you?" "He's got some crazy idea that you'll be angry with him." "You better let me see him alone. Come back if you can in about half an hour." "Okay, Mama," Clark said as he kissed her cheek. He and Rose left the room, and in a couple of minutes Buddy's head appeared around the corner of the door. "Honey, is it okay for me to come in?" "It's always all right for you to come in and see me, dearest," Lozelle said, holding out her good arm to welcome him. "Come and give me a kiss and sit with me for a while." She had no idea how the arm lifted in welcome emphasized the other arm's injury. She also had no idea how her smile, meant to lift his spirits, looked coming from under the bandages that covered most of her forehead and one side of her face. Buddy was sorely aware of her condition. He had not been in the Palmas part of the crowd that attacked the Granny Brigade, but he had been able to see it from about 100 yards away. He had known that Lozelle was with that part of the 10 Points activists over his strong objections. He had seen the conflict start, but had not been able to tell which gray-haired woman was Lozelle. But he had been intending, at times, to give Lozelle an angry lecture. At other times, all he could think about was how he could have lost her. He didn't know whether he wanted to cry or yell or curl up in a ball and pull his jacket over his head. He was embarrassed and proud and scared and several other things all at once. For a time after he kissed the visible part of Lozelle's forehead, Buddy just sat and looked at her. His heart ached, and he wanted to unfold her in his arms, but he was afraid he would hurt her. Finally, he leaned forward and cupped her right cheek with his left hand, and then felt a tear running down his own cheek. Lozelle's face blurred, and he felt rather than saw her hand go to the back of his head and pull him close. Finally, Buddy lifted his head and gave Lozelle a small, watery smile and said, "Well, girl, we really made a mess of things that time, didn't we?" "Dearest, the mess was already there. We just fell into it, that's all," she smiled back at him. "You do know, don't you, that I had nothing to do with that goon squad that attacked you?" "Yes, Buddy. I can't believe that you would have done anything like that, or have anything to do with people like that. But some of the palmists are running scared, and they'll stoop to anything. We just gave them the opportunity to show that there are no limits to what they'll do to protect their interests. Organized criminals in particular know there's no way to continue their illegal activities without currency. They have to have a physical object money if they're to run their nasty businesses." I know. You don't have to be on your soapbox with me," Buddy said a little defensively. "Soapbox or not, you know it's true. Lots of the opposition to the 10 Points comes from people who are afraid they can't keep cheating if we win." "Okay, but let's not talk about it anymore." "If you want, darling, but I warn you that everyone else is going to be talking about it, so you'd better think of what you want to say when they bring it up. I can't leave the movement now, Not after we're so close to success. Not after 3 women who trusted me are now dead because of what I asked them to do. I can't let their sacrifice be in vain. Is this movement of yours worth the 3 lives it's taken? Is it worth the suffering you and I have been put through? Buddy's bitter questions revealed a revival of spirit with Lozelle's obvious forgiveness. Oh, my darling, it's worth my life and yours and even Clark's life. Don't think me an unnatural wife and mother because I feel this way. I know wives and mothers are supposed to be willing to have any number of other people suffer and die for the comfort of their loved ones. But we're talking millions of deaths and billions suffering. Even a wife and mother has second thoughts when faced with those numbers of people. Lozelle's vehemence, even as she cupped his cheek with her free hand, warned Buddy that perhaps he didn't really want to argue the point just now. His own confidence shattered, he realized in that moment that Lozelle really meant what she said. The emotion in her voice, though quiet, seemed unshakable to Buddy. For someone who had been through what she had suffered to be ready to do it again without hesitation was almost frightening to Buddy, especially in someone he had always considered weak and useless except in bed and as an ornament. As Buddy thought back to the time leading up to the clash outside Congress, he recalled that Lozelle had seemed to be often in meetings which Buddy had considered purely social, but which in retrospect must have been organizational. True, the women had often brought food and the men had dressed informally, but perhaps that was just cover. Buddy had avoided the meetings or parties, as he had called them, but in what little he had seen of them, Lozelle had at first been on the periphery, but by the end it seemed that almost everyone's comments had been directed toward her, or at least she had been glanced at for approval. Buddy also remembered that Lozelle's voice, which had always before seemed to end every statement with an upward inflection as if she were asking if talking were all right, and if the listener agreed with what she had to say, had lost that affectation and now seemed confident and even at times authoritative. This was not the woman he had married 25 years ago, but it was certainly someone he had to respect. He wondered if she would continue to defer to him. Certainly she had not deferred on the 10 points bill and this whole new money thing. He had made his own position abundantly clear. She must have known it, yet she went on quietly working to bring about that which he opposed. In fact, if he could believe the news broadcasts, the bill was as good as passed, and the only question remaining was if it would gain the president's signature. According to those broadcasts, one of the key factors when the issue hung in the balance was Lozelle's granny brigade. But he had decided to go back to his business and ignore politics. If he could, he would bring Lozelle with him. If not, he would have to go alone. In these times, there would be nothing left of his business if he wasn't there to hold it together, and he couldn't see someone as strong as Lozelle staying with him if he were not also successful. Invisible Hand, Chapter 7, Home Life, in which Neil has a nightmare, wakes up, and has a nightmare, and breakfast. So warm and soft. How can women be so good to touch? Neil wondered, stroking her side, then bringing his hand up to caress her face. No, Neil, not now. I'm sure she's listening. Come on, Kathy. Bree's fast asleep. Not Brianna, our noisy neighbor. She won't hear us. But I just know she's listening for us. Please, Neil. Besides, we have to get up. It's a school day for Brianna. Neil's passion hated taking no for an answer, but Catherine was already out of bed, so... Neil was awakening Brianna. Get up, get up. You have to go to school. I don't want to go to school. It's boring there, and teacher doesn't like me. She won't let me read what I want, and she makes me color inside the lines. You have to go to school now. Get up. Neil went out the door and found himself on the street. It was a poor neighborhood. Everything looked grimy. Even the dead dog looked like it had been there for several days, since it had been smashed very flat by the passage of many wheels over the hairy shape. Neil had to get to work. It was somewhere around here, or was it over there where the white buildings were? He walked toward the buildings, passing a store with some television monitors in the window. Neil had the feeling that they were looking at him, so he started to cross the street in the middle of the block. There were no cars coming. As he stepped off the curb, he heard, "Jaywalking! Stop where you are and get back on the curb!" in a loud, authoritative, but impersonal voice. He stopped, feeling a little fear, and looked around. The TV sets in a window glared at him, and the voice from a speaker he hadn't noticed said, "Get out of the street now!" in that emotionless voice again. Neil stepped up on the curb again. The TV screens were once again a flat, shiny black. This is silly, Neil thought, turned and started across the street once again. "Stop now! That is not permitted! Return to the curb!" "All right, come with me." "But, officer, I didn't do anything." "You were disobeying the computer. Get in the car." "Where are you taking me?" "I'm just giving you your freedom." "But I'm already free." You are free to obey the computer, but you are not obeying. Therefore, you are not free. I will make you obey the computer. Then you will be free. Get out of the car now. Where are we? This is where you will be held. Get in the box. I'm hungry and thirsty. Can you give me something to eat and water to drink? Here, hold this pebble in your mouth. I don't want a pebble. I want food. I want water. I want to take a bath. Neil's body began to itch, especially his scalp. He felt his sores hurting. His feet were bare and filthy, his clothes rags. Worse, he had to go to the bathroom. Where was the can? Had they forgotten to bring it back? Did he have to go in the corner again? But she's watching. I can't go in the corner. She'll see me. Everybody will laugh at me. Stop watching me. Leave me alone. Let me out. May I help you? What's wrong? Are you all right? Neil began to awaken. His body was drenched in sweat and trembling. He really did have to go to the bathroom, but he was no longer in the box, but the somewhat plain guest bedroom at Brianna's apartment. The TV on the wall was asking, "Is there anything I can do to help you? Are you in pain?" No, it was just a nightmare. I'm fine. The room was lit by the bright lettering on the TV screen, showing the time as 5:30 a.m., and in smaller letters the indoor and outdoor temperatures. The brightness began to fade, leaving the room in relative darkness, but Neil swung both legs over the side of the bed, and the room lights came on to a low level so he could easily see his slippers in the furniture. Neil sat on the edge of the bed and waited for his heart to slow somewhat. Then he went to the bathroom and sat on the toilet to relieve himself, with nobody watching, thank God, and did some thinking about what he'd learned the night before. It was clear that somebody was in total control of everything that was happening. It was a steel hand in a velvet glove, and though the velvet was soft, he knew the steel hand was inexorable. Images flashed in his mind, the constant monitoring of everyone's activities and the absolute control of work through that coordinator business. He still didn't know what a coordinator was, but it sounded ominous. The obviously secret police aspect of checking up on everybody through their friends. Everything was clearly set up to totally control a population in a very efficient way. Some genius was obviously at work here. Probably some secret organization was behind it all. It sounded like paranoid ravings to him even as he thought it, but how else could you explain the sweeping changes? Nothing this big and well organized could come about by accident. It had to be by design. But what could he do about it? Both Tony and Brianna seemed to like their life just fine, or at least they were tolerating it. He didn't quite know what to think about Tony. He just didn't add up right. Here he was, living mostly on the dole, on handouts, with his wife having to cut corners just to buy paints, and yet he seemed happy to go off each day to the library and mess around with the books. But maybe he wasn't looking at books. Maybe he was doing all his research on the computer. Of course, that way the computer knew just where he was and everything he was doing. Tony seemed intelligent enough. Why was he content to have his family living in relative poverty? Maybe he wasn't really doing what he told his wife he was doing. Maybe that reluctance to let her read his work was just a cover for almost never writing anything. Maybe he was really working for the state in some secret capacity. But doing what? Undercover work? Maybe he wasn't at the library at all. On the other hand, his daughter seemed to genuinely love Tony, and the kids certainly enjoyed his company. Damn, there was no certainty about anyone. He couldn't even communicate with his daughter without that computer overhearing. Sure, they said it only told the other people what you gave it permission to tell them, but he didn't believe that for a moment. What could he do? First, I need more information, Neil thought. But what do I need to know? I need to know the goals of this organization that runs things. I need to know whether Brianna's family is important enough to them that they'll stop us from leaving the country. I need to know what its weaknesses are. There are so many things I need to know. No, first I need breakfast, he thought as his stomach growled. It was used to Neil's eating on London time. He finished in the bathroom, returned to the bedroom, consciously not looking at the TV screen, and opened the bedroom window curtains to catch dawn brightening the eastern sky while he got dressed. At least I don't have to wear those white things, he groused. Then he went to the kitchen. The refrigerator had a few staples and a rather small freezer. Certainly there wasn't enough food there for anyone to have breakfast. He decided to go to the Good and Quick. He opened the apartment door and found a man with a hand truck putting a box down next to the door. From the looks of the hall, he was putting similar boxes in front of most of the apartments. "Good morning, Mr. Campbell," he said. "Up early, I see. I didn't know what you would like for breakfast, so I just put in an assortment of things. If you'll just mark what you want for tomorrow on the order form, I'll see that you get it." Good morning. Who are you?" Neil managed. "Oh, sorry. I'm Herb Watkins. Herbert, that is. Just call me Herb," the man said, holding out his hand. "I work for the Ace Milk Company. Of course, we do a lot more than milk these days." Neil shook hands without thinking and asked, "How did you know I was here? How did you know my name? Your daughter told us you were coming. She just didn't know when. Naturally, when one of the guys saw you at the Good and Quick last night, he told me that you'd arrived, so, of course, I put some stuff in the box for you. Well, thanks. That'll save me a trip to Good and Quick, Neil conceded. I'll be back about 10 o'clock to pick up the empties, so please have your order ready by then. Oh, yeah, right. No problem, Neil said, and the man went on down the hall. Neil took the box into the kitchen and unloaded it into the refrigerator and the cabinets. The box was insulated and rather light. On the outside of the hinged lid, it had a plastic order form with a variety of items on it that could be marked along with the quantity desired. A small pencil-like instrument was attached next to the form. Neil used it to mark the things he wanted for breakfast the next morning. He'd have to ask Brianna if she were eating in or out tomorrow. There seemed to be plenty of food in the box for the 5 of them to have lunch or dinner, but not both. By the time he'd put everything away, Brianna came in wearing a bathrobe, very plain, so probably a standard. Dad, thanks, but I didn't want you to have to do all this. It's okay. Now I know where everything is, he replied. What would you like me to fix you for breakfast? Whatever you're having. After living with the locals in the Middle East for so long, everything looks good. Brianna began to move about the small kitchen, getting breakfast organized with the occasional small yawn. After a moment, Neil asked, What does it cost you to have the food delivered to the door this way? How can you and your neighbors afford this kind of service? We don't pay anything for it. It's all standard food. They want us to use their food, so they make it really convenient. If they didn't deliver, we'd probably go to one of the fast food places more often instead of the grocery. It's just a way of competing for our business. But surely it costs a lot more to deliver food to the door every day. Not really, Dad. This apartment complex has a lot of people living here, so the truck can be fully loaded each time it comes here. Plus, the people are living rather close together, so Mr. Watkins doesn't have to go far with each hand truck load. And he's finished in a couple of hours, and he and the truck have time for other work. He doesn't get paid a lot for what he does, but he does get paid rather quickly since we get the benefit of what he does within a couple of hours. Of course, in the winter, they also give us an emergency box, in case we get a bad storm and they can't make deliveries for several days. Those boxes get stored in the basement until we need them. But the expense to the company has to be more. No, Dad, it's actually less. This way they have far less food to put on the shelves, and the inventory is easier to keep track of. There's far less damage to the food from dropped bottles and such. The store is a lot smaller since far less food passes through it. You don't have to have people manning the checkout lines for all this food since it bypasses the checkout line. Also, you know exactly how much of each kind of food you need to have on hand and when. It makes everything so predictable. Also, if their food starts being of low quality, we just go out to eat more and request less food to be delivered. Pretty quickly they get the idea and improve the quality or forego a lot of pay. It's just basic business practices, Dad. Yes, Neil thought, and it also gives them far more control over you. If there's unrest in the masses, it's so easy to cut off the food. What a trap. You wouldn't even need to send in the riot police. What are your plans today? Neil asked. Oh, we're flexible. If you want to sit around and rest up from your trip, we can just do our regular routine. If you want to take a tour of the city, we can do that too. It's been quite a while since I took the kids on an outing. There are lots of things we can do. What about the kids' school? This is a school day, isn't it? Any day we want is a school day. We homeschool, Brianna said proudly. You what? Homeschool. Teach the kids ourselves at home. It's great. We go at our own pace and the curriculum is individualized. The kids don't even realize it's school half the time. They just follow their interests. But you can't do that to them. They need a real education in a school. Homeschooling is for religious nuts and defective kids. Neil had gone through enough worrying, and now this. He was near the end of his rope. It seemed like everything had changed while he'd been away. There were no more constants. Come on, Dad. Did those kids look defective to you? Do you think we're religious nuts? Brianna said, half laughing. But how are they going to learn to get along with their peers if they aren't in school? How are they going to learn to work with others? It's unnatural to keep them alone with you all day. They'll never learn to be independent. They'll always be whining loners. Dad, how do you think kids were reared on the frontier? How was Lincoln educated? What about Benjamin Franklin? They seem to do all right. Yeah, well, they didn't have any choice, did they? There's no way you can do as good a job educating these kids as a real teacher in a real school. Oh, really? Who knows them better than I do? Who loves them more than I do? Who knows how they think better than I do? Answer me that. Brianna, her motherly pride hurt, was getting a little angry herself. Well, what about teacher training? Have you had any education courses? No. Did Socrates have any education courses? I've been teaching the children since they were born. John is doing just fine with reading and math and geography and so forth. The proof is in the pudding. What makes you think a school teacher could have done better? They not only are taught how to teach, They have textbooks and resources you just can't afford, and schools have specialists that know more about their subjects than you ever could. It's just better in school. We can get any textbooks I want, Dad. They don't cost us anything. And if there's something I don't know, we can always find information about it on the computer. Yeah, the computer. I don't want my grandchildren educated by any computer. I want them educated right, and that means in a school by real human teachers. You can want all you like, but they're my kids, and I'll make the decisions about their education. You can reconcile yourself to that or not, but that's how it's going to be. Brianna was nose to nose with him, her face flushed, her hands making fists at her sides. Mommy, Mommy, what are you yelling about? Why are you fighting with Granddad? Little Laura came running in and threw her arms around her mother. We were just discussing how to help you become the most wonderful woman in the world, weren't we, Dad? Neil's anger was rapidly ebbing, and he smiled down at Laura and said, Honey, we're just trying to decide what's best for you. Mommy's best for me, Laura said, and went over to the table and climbed up on a chair. I want French toast, Mommy. Neil and Brianna looked at each other and knew the argument would continue later. Invisible Hand, Chapter 8, Power of the President, in which the President reveals a source of power, and Buddy has a change of heart. Grandmothers. They let a bunch of stinking grandmothers buffalo them. Yeah, well, it's done now. That damn bill is on my desk, and it won't go away just because we have contempt for Congress. Now, what are we going to do about it? Mr. President, I think you can safely veto it in a month or so. That'll give people time to forget about that debacle and realize that pipe dreams won't pay the bills. There was a general round of confirmatory grunts from most of the dozen or so men seated around the large table. Mr. President, if I may make a few points, the Secretary of Labor said, lifting his hand. Make away, Sam. Remind me of how much trouble we have. Well, sir, we've had over 100,000 people die this winter from lack of heat, and most of them were elderly. Our unemployment is over 15% and climbing. Inflation is about 20% since the first of the year. Our imports of oil are down to just 15% of our total, used over 50%. If I'm not mistaken, we haven't been able to borrow from the World Bank or anywhere else for over a month. If we let things ride without some indication that we have a solution for these problems, you and the party can kiss any chances of re-election goodbye. I say we have no choice but to sign this bill, if only to give people hope. By the time the Secretary had finished, he was sweating, even though the room was rather too cool to be comfortable. As part of the White House plan to show the people that the President was sharing their problems, the thermostat was set at only 60 degrees. The grim and even angry faces of some of the other officials around the table reflected their bitterness that Labor had mentioned the elephant in the living room. What good does it do to give them hope with this fairy tale 10 points thing when it won't work, and if we sign they'll forget that we opposed it and blame us for the failure? The Secretary of the Treasury was not one to suffer fools gladly. Wait, maybe he has a point here, the Attorney General said. This money thing can't take effect until they've trained a bunch of people to run it, right? So that's going to take at least a couple of years. By then, we'll be reelected as the champions of hope. Whenever someone complains about a bill or some expedient we take to get the economy going again, we can say it's just a stopgap measure to get us through until the transition to the new money. Then when the new money fails, as it is sure to do, the crisis will be over and we can go back to real money again with some chance to succeed. There is some merit to that, the Secretary of State put in. Look what this 10 points thing does to the international situation. It won't make OPEC sell us oil, but it pretty much cancels the debts we've run up. If the government doesn't have money, then it can't pay money. Why would anyone loan us money if they know we can't pay them back? Treasury barked. Are they loaning us anything now? State shot back. Gentlemen, calm down, the President admonished. Sam, I know the German economy almost ceased to exist back after World War I when the government printed more and more money to pay the bills. But couldn't we do something like that in a more subtle way to pay the bills without the inflation eating us alive? Labor snorted and said, It's already eating us alive. Our economy is about to crash, gentlemen, unless we do something about it, and soon. What about fixing prices? Asked the Secretary of Education. We'll have the black market siphoning off all the goods people have to have, and the inflation will still be there, Treasury said contemptuously. We'll have to go to rationing like they did back in World War II. There'll be a black market and theft and so on, but at least we may be able to keep enough of the necessities under control to prevent chaos, Labor said. You can't control necessities unless you nationalize almost all the major industries, and that's socialism at best. How are you going to keep the lid on, Treasury asked. Actually, we can control the major industries relatively easily, put in the Secretary of Homeland Security. We have some tools in place that let us watch them pretty closely. I took the initiative to prepare for just such a situation as we have here. I think I can guarantee that there won't be any problems with nationalizing what that we can't handle." "What do you mean we have some tools in place?" Labor said. "It's simple. We now have the computer capacity to monitor all the airports, bus stations, and such, so we know who is going where as soon as they book their flights. And we watch them board and deplane. We know what they have in their luggage, and we know where they sleep and with whom in the hotels. That part was easy. The harder part was to extend this surveillance to their offices. They're more security conscious there. But as you all know, every computer bought in the last 2 years has some extra features that their owners probably don't know about. We have almost total penetration of every significant office in the U.S. and much of the rest of the world. I can let you know what's being planned in every major company and most minor companies in the U.S. What you don't know," Homelander looked briefly at the U.S. President and received a small nod in return, "is that we now have the computer resources to actually use all the data that comes in. We can actually follow individuals with the computer, flagging suspicious behavior for human review. If anybody tries to get out of line, we'll know about it and can take steps to squash them. They won't know how we do it, but it'll get done." Homeland leaned back in his chair with a satisfied expression on his face as he watched the various secretaries realize that they had computers in their offices which had been bought within the last 2 years. Some of their faces were quite revealing. That'll bring them around, he thought. What I didn't tell them was that within 6 months every television, car, and major appliance will also have those features, and the television will be watching you more than you watch it. There were even a few things the President didn't know about that Homeland thought were better kept from him for the time being. After a few minutes of general consternation and red faces, the meeting came to order. "Given that we can ration the necessities, I say we can keep things going for at least the 2 years until the new money kicks in," Labor said. "Then give it no more than, say, 6 months to fail and we go back to real money. People will have to accept the stringent measures we'll have to take to get out of the chaos of the new money. By then, the international situation may have calmed down. With the way the world's economies are staggering, I think OPEC will want us as a market again by then. What do you think?" "I say we have little choice. People would never accept the belt-tightening we'll have to endure without the promise of something better soon. This 10 points thing is really a godsend in disguise," the Attorney General said calmly. Discussion continued for over an hour thereafter, but in the absence of any better suggestions, it was decided to wait a couple of weeks to see if support for the 10 points died down, and if it did not, then the President would sign the bill. "Clark, you must be feeling pretty smug. Mr. Frobisher was very complimentary about your part in getting the 10 points bill passed." "I'm happy that it passed, but it seems like I did hardly anything at all. I mean, you did all the hard work and suffered a broken arm and all to get Congress to pass the bill. And I had no idea why the President signed it when we all knew he was opposed to it from the beginning. All I did was play with the computer a little." "Well, as your mother, I say I'm very proud of all you did to make it work. We still have to set up a payer organization and train people for that. We have to get the computer programs to keep track of the money and, well, there's just a million things left to do. But what are you going to do now that the bill is passed?" "I'm going to help your father get the business back on track. He says he needs me. Can you believe that, Clark? He wants me to help him in his business." Loiselle still couldn't get over how Buddy's attitude toward her had changed. Before, he had seemed to take her for granted. But now, well, she didn't quite know how he felt about her. He even seemed to be a little afraid of her sometimes, but very appreciative. Well, it was going to be another challenge, but then her mother had warned her that life with Buddy would be challenging. Invisible Hand, Chapter 9, Tourist, in which Neil sees some sights and begins to learn about payers. After breakfast, Tony left for the library, and Brianna organized the kids for a tour of the city to show Neil how things had changed since he'd last been there. Kids were excited, and John insisted that he could tell his granddad all about the best things to see. Living near Washington, D.C., they had been to a number of the museums and the monuments on field trips before, but such trips never failed to be a treat for them. As they were going down in the elevator, Neil had a thought. "How are we going to get around? Have you got a car?" "No, no car. We always take the bus. The bus and a little walking always gets us where we need to go," Brianna said. "How about if I rent one?" "That would cost you a lot, plus the hassle, and then we'd have to spend a lot of time looking for parking places. It just isn't worth it. We go places on the bus all the time. It's easy." So they waited at the bus stop in front of the building. Sure enough, within a couple of minutes, a bus pulled up. "Is this our bus?" Neil asked. John said, "They all go downtown eventually. This is one of the express buses. It'll take us only about 30 minutes to get to the Capitol buildings if that's what you want to see." "He's right. We should take this one." They got on the bus, and a couple of people moved so they could sit together. There didn't seem to be any payers on this bus. Everybody was wearing at least one thing that looked like a luxury. Neil was surprised to notice that it was getting so he could pick a payer out of a group almost without thinking about it. He also noticed that there was no charge to ride the bus. "Is everything free, or is it just my imagination?" he asked no one in particular. John said, "Lots of things are luxuries or have a luxury form. Most food's free, but some foods are luxury items. But if it's something that helps you work, like riding the bus to work, that'll most likely be free. Dad says that it used to be that everybody drove cars to work, but that when the transition came, people started riding the bus more so they could save their money for the better luxuries." "Don't forget that there was a huge gas shortage around the time of the transition," Brianna added. "A lot of people couldn't get gas for their cars, so they had to ride the bus. Now that the shortage is over, people have found that they want to spend their money on other things instead of supporting their cars. They found out how really expensive a car is to run when they discovered that it was their biggest expense every month." "I'll bet the price of gas went through the roof," Neil commented. "It got so bad before the transition that the government was rationing the gas. After the transition, gas just sort of rationed itself, and of course the price hasn't changed since the transition." "How does gas ration itself?" Neil asked with disbelief obvious in his expression. "It was the gas stations and the refineries and the distributors. They realized that if they sold gas to people for whom gas was just a luxury, we'd run out of gas sooner, so they only gave gas to people who were using it to do things that we really needed done. Bus drivers could get gas, for example, because people needed to get to work. But car owners had the choice of riding the bus instead, so they didn't get gas. Also, lots of people found that they could do their jobs from home at least some days and didn't commute every day. Lots of other people moved closer to where they worked, at least temporarily. It was like rationing, but there was no central authority saying who would get gas and who wouldn't. It was up to every individual gas station owner. They each made their own decisions, and since the petroleum industry was making all their records public so everybody could see how much gas and oil we had, and how it was being distributed, and how much we used each day, and what we had coming in from abroad, we could all see what a difference our efforts were making. In a lot of ways, it was rather exciting." Neil thought, "No central authority my foot. I'll bet government rationing was continued. They just called it something else." "It seemed like everyone was pulling together," Brianna continued, awash in nostalgia. "People found that by riding the bus or train and staying home more, they spent far less on gas. We also found that we could produce all sorts of things without using petroleum. Corn farmers were supplementing their gasoline with alcohol, for example. These days, of course, we convert almost any organic material to natural gas and oil, so we use very little petroleum. They say that within a few years we won't be pumping any oil since we already have plenty of organic material available to just keep recycling it for the oil we need. We also don't have a garbage problem anymore. We just dump everything into the recycling bins and it goes to the TDP plants to be made into oil and fertilizer and such." "TDP plants? What are they?" Neil asked. I know, Laura piped up. "Trips are exciting, but it's more fun when Mommy pays attention to her best girl." "TDP makes gas!" "I know," said John with an air of superiority. "TDP is the thermal conversion process, also known as thermal depolymerization. They use heat and pressure to break big molecules into small ones. They keep the process going by burning the gas that comes out." "Yes," said his mother. "Those landfills, garbage dumps, and sewage treatment plants turned out to be full of things we could make into oil. For a while there, it was as if everybody was going to get rich building those TDP plants. They sprouted up all over the country. They even put biohazard hospital waste into those things, and the result comes out absolutely sterile." "And," John broke in, "we also get lots of our electricity from burning the gas, and the water that comes out is sterile, so we don't have any pollution from our garbage anymore." It's a family curse, Neil thought. They all want to give me lectures. By this time, the bus had left the poor neighborhood with its large apartments, and one could see the top of the Washington Monument in the distance. As they approached the bridge, the number of buses had increased so that almost all the traffic was trucks and buses with the occasional taxi. "Dad," said Brianna, "would you rather ride the bus around to sightsee or get out and walk? Laura can't walk a long way, but if you'd like to walk, we can get a stroller for her and push her." Neil, remembering Washington as he had known it, didn't want to ride through some of the bad neighborhoods and have derelicts and drug addicts get on the bus with him. "Let's get out and walk around the Capitol buildings like the other tourists." When the bus pulled into its next stop, they trooped off and John said, Let's go to the Smithsonian first. No, I want to see the dinosaurs, Laura pleaded. This trip is for Granddad, Brianna pointed out. Let's see what he wants to see. As they walked past one of the huge office buildings that had been built for congressional staff, Neil noticed that it had been converted into a hotel. This surprised him. What did it do with the people who worked in those offices, he asked. Brianna said, most of them moved away when their jobs ended. You mean they got fired? Neil was incredulous. No, said Brianna, they just didn't make enough money at what they were doing and went other places where they could make more money. Remember that this town was mainly for running the government. There are a few government agencies left, like the Census Bureau. I think they still have their original offices. D.C. still has some colleges and a few military bases, and a lot of tourists still come, but for a time there it looked like it would just dry up and blow away. Where did they move the government? Most of it didn't move at all. It just ceased to exist. They didn't have to enforce business regulations anymore. There was no more welfare system. Almost the only laws that are left are state laws for things like marriage and crimes like stealing and assault. We even have a lot fewer things that are crimes. Oh, you still get arrested if you hurt someone or do something bad to a child. If you destroy something that doesn't belong to you, it's a crime. But if you want to gamble or take recreational drugs like alcohol, it isn't against the law. And you can run your businesses any way you want. Of course, you won't make any money if you're hurting people or making their lives unpleasant. A lot fewer things that are crimes, Neil thought. I'll bet they just don't bother with trials and such. Off to prison or whatever, and nobody even knows about it. That's the way they'd reduce the crime statistics. The biggest businesses here now are coordinating international trade. So the government runs international trade. Oh no, about all they have to do with that is gathering information from our embassies in other countries. They make it available to our traders so they'll have as much information as possible. The traders are given all sorts of things to exchange with other nations and businesses. What? Sorry, let me start that one over. You see, we want things from other nations, and so we have to trade for them. So far, so good? Yeah, that's obvious. So since we have no money of our own, for all practical purposes, we have to trade by barter, Brianna explained. Barter's too inefficient, Neil said. That's why a good money is necessary to a good economy. Remember how Germany suffered in the 1920s from incredible inflation? They fell back on barter and the economy almost collapsed. But, Dad, when you have the resources of a whole nation and you're dealing with huge quantities, barter is just as efficient as trade using money. Also, it doesn't matter how the economy of your trading partner is doing. You can still trade whether they have money or not, and whether it's suffering from inflation or not. Remember when Brazil had that 1,000% per week inflation? It didn't affect any of our trades with them. We still wanted their products, and they still wanted ours. In effect, we were saying to them, so long as you produce things we want, we'll give you things you want, so keep producing. This let them continue to work and produce, knowing that they'd be getting paid in goods. I wasn't exactly reading the newspapers during that crisis, so I can't say I remember what happened, said Neil. But where do these international traders get the goods to trade? People give them stuff to trade. In exchange for what? Nobody gives something for nothing unless they're forced to. In exchange for money. The payers find out what's done with the stuff we got in exchange for our goods, and when we use or consume that stuff, those who supplied the traders get paid. But why in the world would somebody produce something and just give it to one of the traders and hope that he'd make a good trade? It might take months before anything came back so you could get paid. Dad, why did companies in the old days hire salesmen? Didn't those companies give their products to those salesmen and hope the salesman would return with money? That's what the international traders, or ITs, are. They're salesmen for all the people who give them things. They're just salesmen. It would be really hard for every producer to find and develop a foreign market for themselves, so they ask the ITs to do it for them. ITs are really experts in what they do. They're very good at negotiating, and they have all this information, like satellite images and such, and they help each other. You really can make a lot more money by giving your products to an IT than you can by trying to trade them yourself. But how do you know how much you'll get paid? They might just take the stuff and leave you flat, Neil pointed out. How did any business know how much profit it was going to get in the old days? They didn't know. They just had to do the best they could and hope for the best. But what if an IT just took the goods and ran off with them? Neil was determined to show it wouldn't work. Just why, he wasn't sure, especially given that it was rather obvious that it already was working. Reputation, Dad. If they did that, no one would give them more stuff. They get a lot of money for being good traders, and that money would be cut off. If they just left the country, all the money that they would get for trades that they had made previously would be unavailable. They have everything to lose and nothing to gain by running off. Look, Basically, the ITs find out what other people want and let our producers know what they think can be used to make the best deals. They don't have to force anyone to give them things. If you make something that an IT can trade for something a lot more valuable, then you can make more money by giving it to the IT to trade for you than you can by putting it in a store here. It's really the same thing as giving your product to a department store or whatever here. The IT just has his store overseas. In some cases, the big traders work out deals worth millions or billions of dollars to the producers. You're still evading my question, Neil said. How does a manufacturer know how much he'll get paid for the things he gives to one of the IT guys? No matter what you do, you never know for sure whether you'll get paid. All sorts of things could go wrong. If you're a farmer, the weather or insects or fire or birds or any number of other things could destroy your crop before you can complete the harvest. If you make a product like luxury furniture, perhaps no one will buy it. Life just isn't certain, and I don't think it was before the transition. Who can guarantee anybody that they'll be treated fairly? The only proof I can give you is that it seems to work. Mommy, are you lecturing? Laura asked to general laughter. Yes, darling, Mama's lecturing. It seems to be the family curse. I don't lecture, I just talk, was the rejoinder. Neil now began to see where the power had gone. He didn't believe for a moment that those people were giving things to the traders voluntarily. That was just ridiculous. There was probably some deal you can't refuse going on, or Neil didn't know people. With so much money at stake, there were bound to be power plays, and power plays in the final analysis came down to killing. Every nation Neil had worked in abroad had its black market and its secret police. They were bound to be here as well. They were just more secret and better hidden here. Lunch was served in a standard food place, which was quite crowded with tourists and not a few payers. 2 tables had been pushed together, and there were 6 payers, a little older than average for payers, it seemed to Neil, based on the payers he had noticed. They were eating together and discussing payments in the millions. The other diners were studiously not paying attention to the conversation, but you could tell that everyone at the nearby tables was listening attentively. After they left the restaurant, Neil asked about the group of payers. They're one of the committees that helps decide on the pay of the ITs. They have to judge what difference the trades they've arranged have made for our economy. I know one of them was an economics professor before the transition. He was the one talking about demand curves and how what we've been trading for will affect foreign economies. Each of the others has specialties as well. One of them was also a fabulously wealthy IT at one time. He was in the news for a week when he made the decision to become a payer. He must have had thousands of people asking, begging, and demanding to be given his luxuries since he wasn't going to be able to use them anymore. When he made his first payment, he still had some $16 billion in his account. That month, everybody who earned money got a little more because his money wasn't ever going to be spent. And he gave up all that luxury? I don't believe that. I'll bet he still has plenty of luxuries and you just don't see them. He probably goes home to a mansion just like before. Dad, he was so famous that after the first payment, some people followed him around just to see if he'd be given special treatment. He couldn't even ride the bus since it would fill with people watching him. He took an apartment very near the offices where he'd worked, and he walked everywhere. He's still pretty well known, but at least people give up following him. I will say this, though. The other payers respect his opinions on what deserves higher pay and what doesn't, because he actually did the job. Of course, he can't make payment decisions for the people he used to work closely with, so he had to switch fields of trade. But my main point is that he has to live and work among the common folks, and they will notice if he has a luxury. He has to be particularly careful to avoid giving any grounds for your suspicion. She then turned to John, who had been entertaining Laura. John, I expect you to write me an essay on reasons why a rich man would consider becoming a payer. It'll be to help your granddad understand. Her wicked grin showed that she was killing several birds with one stone and wanted Neil to know it. Before they took the bus for home, Brianna insisted that they tour some of the old slum neighborhoods. Neil was expecting to see yuppie types in expensive apartment buildings. What he did see was the same old buildings on clean streets. The people living there were mostly wearing at least some whites. There were no visible bums or druggies. The children were well-dressed and seemed well-fed. In fact, they looked very much like the street on which Brianna lived. What happened to the people who lived here before? Neil asked. Most of them are still here. Some of them worked on redecorating the apartments and other buildings downtown. Lots of them work in the hotels and stores in the area. Once the government offices left, there was a surplus of upscale housing close in to downtown, so the owners didn't convert them to luxury places. Why did the owners redecorate the apartments? Because some of the tenants are payers. What did you think? Brianna said. The payers won't pay much for poorly maintained apartments. Also, in a lot of cases, the tenants themselves just went ahead and redecorated. They could get the paint and tools and materials without paying, since those are capital goods, and they did some really nice things with these places. I wouldn't want to live with some of the decor they created, but they like it, and that's what counts. On the way home, the kids became quiet, and Neil had time to think about what he had seen today. The derelicts, the garbage, the rundown houses, and idle children on the streets, the terrible poverty which had been obvious in the district when he had been there previously, all seemed to have disappeared. But he was still not comfortable with what might have happened to the people. It was all well and good to say that the people were the same ones who had been there the last time he had been in Washington, but he didn't think that meant much. For all he knew, the addicts and bums might have been put in camps and executed. Not that he thought that likely, but forced labor had been used to support a leisure class before, and all these people who were eating free and riding the bus free and living in apartments free must be supported by some people who were working their tails off. Invisible Hand, Chapter 10, Farm Life, in which Loisel works some deals, oil is produced, and Buddy hears from the feds. "Dear, I've been talking to some of your hands," Loisel announced as she marched briskly into Buddy's office with a determined look on her face. "You've been what?" Buddy asked incredulously. "I've been talking to some of your employees that work on our farms. They're suffering, and you aren't doing anything about it." "What do you mean? I have some of the safest farms to work on in the state. I even have special training for new employees on safety procedures." "I'm not talking about getting injured on the job. I'm talking about living conditions." "They don't live on our farms. You're out of your mind." Buddy's expression looked sour, and he turned back to his overflowing desk. "They're suffering at home. They don't have enough to live on." "Well, I can't pay them any more than I do, so there's nothing I can do about it," Buddy said while looking back at his papers, obviously wishing she would leave. Ah, how soon they forget. "You can pay them in other ways," Loisel persisted, and perched on the corner of the desk. "They have high expenses now in paying their utilities and in getting to work. They can't even afford enough food in some cases. You could build housing here on the farms and pay them in food. If they lived here on the farms, they wouldn't have the expenses of getting to work. They could even grow a lot of their own food if you let them have gardens." "Sounds to me like you want to convert this into a feudal village," Buddy scowled at Loisel from under his bushy eyebrows. "Dear, our money is failing us. We have to get along using money only when we have to." Buddy's face got an expression of, "Oh no, here we go again." "What do you think I'm trying to do? Look at these bills. You expect me to pay them with promises?" Loisel's chin came out a little further, and her face grew stern. "A few hundred years ago, they got by using money only rarely, since they made most of the things they used and only bought a few things. Until the transition, we may have to get along pretty much without money ourselves. You know inflation is going to get a lot worse before the transition. You know that the U.S. supply of oil is down to about 40% of what we consumed 2 years ago. We'll have to organize to survive by barter as much as we can. It'll be a lot easier if we organize and plan it now rather than just have it happen to us." Okay, I see your point. Why don't you take care of it however you like? I have too much to do here already." But he was under too much stress to face a long argument with Loisel. Besides, he didn't care where the men lived, and if he didn't have to pay them as much, well, that was all to the good. Loisel smiled brightly on Buddy, patted his shoulder, kissed him on the cheek, and left the office. Outside, she gave a thumbs-up gesture to the 3 men waiting there, then motioned them out of the reception area. They went down the short hallway to the meeting room and took chairs around the table. "He accepted it. We got a free hand," Loisel grinned. Then she sobered. "Now I think we need to begin with housing. By moving the hands onto farms, we're going to solve a lot of problems, but we're going to create a lot more. Jack, how much lumber can you turn out at the sawmill?" "Oh, we can turn out plenty of boards, but we don't have all the other stuff you need for housing. We need wiring and plumbing and foundation cement and nails, tools, and other equipment. We just aren't set up to build houses." "Pete, what have we got to trade with the local building supply companies?" Loisel asked, turning to the next man. "We're a farm, so we have lots of different foods, especially since you had us emphasize growing crops people could eat and would be easy to preserve. So we have lots of peanuts, potatoes, beans, turnips, corn, carrots, and greens. Do we have anything else?" "We could offer some of the lumber," Jack mumbled. "Better yet, let's offer to mill their trees into lumber. We have the capacity, and they could use the lumber," Morris offered. "Good, Morris. That's the kind of ideas we need. Think outside the box," Loisel brightened. "So we can offer food," Walt said, sounding discouraged. "Wait. How are they going to store the food? How about we offer them so much food each week for a year? We can store it here and dole it out. That way we won't waste it. In 2008, about 60% of the oil consumed in the U.S. was imported. By 2011, the amount of oil consumed was down to only 45% of the 2008 levels because of the tremendous drop in imports. Despite government efforts to control the price of gasoline, it had quickly gone over $10 a gallon, and light sweet crude was costing U.S. oil companies over $300 a barrel. Refinery capacity was standing idle. Exploration of old and new possible fields increased almost feverishly, but the change in supply had been too quick for the oil industry to have any chance of producing a domestic solution for the shortage of crude oil. The nation was painfully discovering how vulnerable it was and how dependent an industrial economy is on its sources of energy. The lack of gasoline was affecting almost everything Buddy's business did. His farms had already started going to alternate fuels like corn alcohol and natural gas from fermenting wastes, but that still left over 90% of the energy needs of the farm to be met from gasoline or electricity, which was just as expensive. The previous summer, most of his farms had planted rather large crops of garden vegetables, potatoes and peanuts, since imported vegetables had become too expensive for most families to buy. For the 2011 growing season, Buddy planned to go heavily into beans as well. He had no difficulty finding willing workers, since he offered a share of the crop in addition to money wages. The privations of winter had made the poorer people of rural Georgia look upon food much the way their ancestors had 150 years ago before the end of the Civil War, known in Buddy's neighborhood as the War of Northern Aggression. The continuing inflation made food a more dependable reward than a fixed wage. Horses on the farm were back in fashion. Not for plowing, but for getting from one task to another on the farm. There were not enough heavy work horses for plowing and such, of course, but there were a surprising number of riding horses. Many were even on the market because lots of people who owned pleasure horses could no longer afford to keep them. Of course, few farmhands knew how to care for horses, let alone how to ride them. But there were lots of teenage girls out there who did know these things and who were only too happy to have a chance to continue their love affair with all things equine. They taught the farmhands, cared for their former hooved possessions, and got paid for it. Not all businesses were suffering during this period. Those businesses that supplied energy from sources other than petroleum were prospering. In fact, solar energy, wind energy, hydroelectric, and even energy from tides was being utilized as never before. Of course, these sources could make up only a small percentage of the energy deficit from the loss of oil from abroad. Old oil fields that had once been too expensive to keep in production were now profitable again, with a barrel of oil bringing over $300. Even conservation was being tried as a last resort. The enterprise that was seeing the greatest growth, however, was one that had patented a thermal conversion process. As the name implies, TDP is a process which uses heat and pressure to convert waste containing hydrocarbons, such as paper, sewage, tires, tar, plastics, wood, seaweed, and just plain garbage in general, into oil, gas, fertilizer, and recoverable metals. The process had been largely ignored for several years, but by the time the price of a barrel of oil seemed to have permanently gone over $100, any process that could produce a barrel of diesel oil for about $15 to $25 became too profitable to ignore. But the lag between investment in the TDP and the plants coming online was just too great to prevent the shortage. Buddy had been one of the first farm owners to recognize the value of such equipment to a large farm organization, mostly for getting rid of polluting wastes at first. When the equipment was first installed, his farms had used it only for their own wastes, but as the price of oil shot up, some of Buddy's employees began offering to dispose of the wastes from surrounding farms. They were paid in cash and disposed of the wastes they collected by secretly adding it to the waste from Buddy's land. As a result, Buddy's farms were unusual in that they were still able to run their heavy equipment fueled by the diesel oil they had produced. Buddy discovered the covert waste collection and was going to fire those engaged in the activity at first, but then he realized that they were adding to the farm's profitability, and without Buddy having to pay them, since they were doing it after their regular work hours. So rather than firing them, he allowed them to continue so long as they made sure that the wastes from Buddy's farms were processed first. Buddy was no fool, and he did what he could do to increase the production of oil by his plant. He also began construction of a second plant, trading oil and the promise of oil for the materials and labor needed. It was Lozelle, however, who argued for emphasizing the food crops rather than cash crops. At her request, for example, each family who had had someone working for Buddy was invited to plant a large garden on Buddy's land using Buddy's seed. Weekends, Buddy would bus whole families to their fields to tend the gardens. Buddy also offered space in his barns, silos, and warehouses to store their harvest. As a consequence, Buddy had no trouble attracting and keeping hands when many farms simply were neither able to afford to pay hands nor buy fuel. People wanted farm jobs, and farmers wanted to hire them, but they didn't have the money. People wanted the products of those farms, but they didn't have the money. Buddy was using barter to get around these money problems. With fertilizer and pesticide becoming too expensive to use, what was called natural means of pest control and fertilization increased substantially. Advice on the internet for farming by such methods was invaluable. Buddy was producing his own fertilizer from his TDP, thermal conversion process, plants, but he too encouraged his employees to use the less expensive natural methods. By the harvest of 2011, Buddy was feeling rather smug. He felt that he was prepared for the winter and expected to be selling his oil and his harvest for high prices. "Hello, Mr. Minton?" the voice on the line inquired when Buddy flipped on his phone. "Yes, Buddy Minton here. What can I do for you?" "Mr. Minton, I represent the National Food Bank, Atlanta office. I see that you have a rather large agricultural operation with most of your farms in the area of Macon." "Yeah, I have some properties other places, but mostly we're southeast of Macon." "I see that you've been a major supplier of soybeans and other foodstuffs for the last few years." "Yes, sir. I'm proud to say that we've been one of the top 10 in Georgia for over 5 years now." "Well, sir, we are very pleased that you seem to have been able to make do this year without buying fuels for your farming operations. That is truly commendable." "Thanks, mister, but I don't think I caught your name." "Oh, sorry. I'm Stanley Cruikshank, Director of the Atlanta Bureau of the National Food Bank." "I'm pleased to hear that, Stanley, but I'm a busy man just now, and I really have to get back to work, so if I'll get right to the point then. We here at the bank would like you to sell your crops to us exclusively this year, and we also have some suggestions as to what we would like you to grow next year." "Stanley, I have a variety of companies that I sell to, and I couldn't think of not letting them bid for my produce. You understand, I'm sure." "Oh, I understand, Mr. Minton, but I'm not sure you quite understand the current situation. As you know, we've had a considerable drop in agricultural production with the price of oil being what it is, and the federal government is responding to this crisis by its food bank program. We would like all the major producers in the nation to come into the bank to show that they support our nation in this time of national crisis. We're sure that you will see it as your patriotic duty to join us in this noble cause." "Nobody is more patriotic than I am, mister, but I wasn't born yesterday either. What prices are you offering?" Mr. Minton, you realize that government revenues have dropped during this depression, and with interest rates being what they are on foreign markets, we just can't pay the prices we would like to for your crops. But we're confident that as a patriotic American, you will be glad to sell us at our top offering price of 40% of the international market price. "The hell I will! I can get 90% without even trying. You can take that offer and—" Buddy yelled into the phone. "Please understand, Mr. Minton, that most of the other large agricultural producers have already joined us in this crusade for food. We even have agreements from the other bulk buyers of agricultural produce to limit their prices to what we offer. I don't think you can get a better offer than the one we're making you. The nation is rallying around this effort to see that there's food for all Americans." "We'll just see about that," Buddy growled and snapped the phone shut. He had learned that smashing the phone shut by clapping his hands together not only was expensive, but painful as well. Buddy quickly entered a number, that of the operator for a local grain elevator. "Jake, Buddy, what prices are you offering for soybeans?" "That's all? That's less than last year. Who's selling to you at those prices?" "So what businesses are you doing?" "You've caved into the food bank. That's what you've done." "Oh, I see. Well, what about the other elevators?" "Yeah, I heard about Wally. That was tough. So Wally is still offering market prices?" "He gave in too. I tell you, Jake, they're going to put us all out of business. How are we going to pay for our loans with no profit margin? Are they going to talk to the bank for you?" "Yeah, but that's just 2 years. 1 year at these prices could bankrupt us all." "Okay, Jake. Hang in there. We'll get through this somehow. Bye." His phone rang almost immediately. "Hello? Mr. Minton, Stanley again. I hope you've had a chance to think over your situation in more detail. I might also remind you that your son, who is living in D.C. these days, has come to the attention of the authorities here as a possible troublemaker. Now, we wouldn't want to have to report to them that his father may be putting him up to anything, now would we?
What's my son got to do with any of this?
Why, nothing, Mr. Minton. But you know what they say, the apple never drops far from the tree. If the father is not really a patriot, then probably the son is somewhat lacking in these same areas. I believe that your son has a somewhat sensitive relationship with a Florida congressman who has taken some controversial positions. Some would even say radical positions. Now, far be it from me to make too much of the follies and enthusiasms of youth, but there are those who say your son had a lot to do with that congressman taking those positions. They also say that those positions may bring down our economy.
Bull, Stanley. What you're doing in forcing me to accept your low prices for my crops, that's what threatens our economy.
Mr. Minton, we're only making sure that everyone gets to eat this winter. Such an endeavor could never be bad for the economy. But resistance to the national will in a time of desperate crisis is tantamount to treason. It undermines the loyal citizens in their time of need. We're sure that we won't be required to consider you as disloyal. We wouldn't have to resort to asking the bank to foreclose on your farms nor seize your assets. But we feel we must have your cooperation, one way or another, and we must and will do what we have to do to get that cooperation, Mr. Minton.
Are you threatening me, Stanley?
Why, no, Mr. Minton. Government agents never threaten. We just point out your situation and indicate the course of action we will be required to follow based on your choices. That isn't a threat. That's just good advice given with your best interests at heart. After some more verbal sparring, Buddy disconnected and stood thinking. His meditations were interrupted by another call. Buddy began to view the phone as a poisonous viper ready to bite him if he got too close. Reluctantly, he reached for the phone.
Hello?
Mr. Minton, I'm glad I caught you in. I'm Mary Steed with the National Energy Commission.
What do you want?
Buddy was already angry and was beginning to feel like everyone was out to get him. Why, only your cooperation. We understand that your TDP plant is producing a surplus of oil for your farm's needs. In fact, we understand that you are producing more than 100 barrels a day above your consumption.
How do you come to understand that?
But he was somewhat taken aback by her knowledge. We have our ways, Mr. Minton, we have our ways. The fact is, Mr. Minton, that you have no real need to keep those extra barrels of oil, and the nation has real needs that you can help meet.
Let me guess. You want me to sell all my surplus oil to some sort of oil bank at a price way below market value.
We were hoping to strike a patriotic chord in your heart. Yes, Mr. Minton, those hundreds of barrels of oil can do so much good, provide heat and vital transportation and electricity to keep our nation's economy moving. We were sure that you'd see it as your duty to join us in keeping our enemies at bay.
And if I don't feel like doing as you suggest, I might find it difficult to sell the oil elsewhere, and might find that the bank no longer sees my farm as a good tax risk.
Goodness, Mr. Minton, you have such an imagination. I shouldn't think that your patriotic friends would go that far, do you? I mean, I can understand why a loyal American would be most displeased to think they were doing business with someone who could help their nation and refused. I could understand how they might not want to do business with someone who is trafficking with an enemy, but I don't think they would go that far. Of course, patriotic feelings in a time of crisis do sometimes get the better of us. I know my own heart just fills with anger when I see suffering which could have been prevented if only... But there I go letting my feelings get the better of me. I'm sure your business associates are more calm and level-headed than I. But of course, you would never have that problem, would you? I'm sure we'll find you to be most cooperative because you are a loyal patriot yourself, despite those things people are saying about your son, which I'm sure are exaggerated.
I'm sure they are. Perhaps they are even total lies. Perhaps they were lies made up by someone jealous of his success. People are sometimes jealous of the success of others. Why, take me, for example. Some people say that I don't deserve to own these farms of mine. Some people say that I was just lucky to get where I am. Some think that I must have cheated to go from a poor boy of a poor family to one of the wealthiest men in Georgia. They've said some very unflattering lies about me, but I don't pay them any mind, and I'm sure you don't either.
Of course I don't, Mr. Minton, but in my job I have to investigate even the most obvious of lies. That's the way it is in government. We have our rules and ordinances which we must follow. We must obey Congress and the administration because that's our job. That's the law of the land. All patriotic Americans do their duty, even when it requires a great sacrifice on their part. I just know that you will see your duty and do it, even as I am doing now. So, Mr. Minton, I'll have that truck come by your TDP plant on a regular schedule, shall I?
Of course you will. Goodbye, Mary.
The frown on Buddy's face grew deeper. How did they know how much oil he was producing, and how much he was using on the farm? Did it matter how they knew? They seemed to have him trapped. Invisible Hand, Chapter 11, Rose Says, in which Neil scoffs at homeschooling, looks for allies, and meets Rose, a mover and shaker, sort of. Upon arriving at the apartment, Laura was put to bed for a nap after a long, tiring day of activities. John went to his room to start writing the paper which would explain why a rich trader would want to become a payer. It wasn't long before Tony arrived from his day at the library and joined Neil and Brianna, who were in the kitchen preparing supper. Neil hadn't been able to leave the topic of homeschooling alone and was pointing out that children became far too dependent on their mother if they weren't exposed to the rough and tumble of childish play in school. After greeting Tony upon his arrival, Neil immediately sought him as an ally in support of his argument. You agree with me, don't you, Tony, that education in school is better than education at home? Well, as to that, Tony said, I don't think you can count on me for much support. I admit that at first I was a little leery of the whole idea, but Brianna wanted it so much that I finally gave in and let her try it. It's worked out great so far. John goes to the testing center every month or two and gets certified for what he's learned. They say he's about 2 years ahead of where he would be in school. Sure, if you force-feed him the stuff they test on, you can even give a parrot to pass those tests, Neil gruffly asserted. He's just memorizing stuff for the tests and forgetting it right after. Actually, Dad, Brianna said, I don't even know what they're going to ask him about each time. I just teach, if you could call it that, whatever he's interested in. Yes, see, what did I tell you? Neil pounced. You aren't giving him a coherent structure. You aren't giving him things in the proper order. You aren't directing his education. You're just letting him play. You probably have him way ahead in some areas and way behind in others. It's unbalanced, and like any unbalanced structure, it could collapse at any time. You'll probably have to spend years overcoming the problems you're making for him with your homegrown so-called education. Hold on there, old man. Brianna's been doing a fine job. If there were any problems with the way John was learning or what he was learning, the testers would have told us right away. That's what they get paid for. Thank you, sweetie. Brianna grinned at Tony and offered him a tempting morsel from the pot she was stirring as a reward. Sure, government testers, Neil said scornfully. I suppose if you don't teach him the right things, they take him away from you. Neil was so upset by now that he completely forgot about not saying anything incriminating in front of the computer. Fat chance, I'd just like to see them try, Brianna bristled. Tony held up both hands to her, so she turned back to the pot, stirring more briskly than was really necessary, and let Tony shoulder the load. Nobody could do that unless we were abusing him. If he were getting an inferior education, what would probably happen is that somebody else would try to teach him what we weren't teaching him, Tony said, trying to calm things a bit. Besides, Brianna put in, unable to resist the temptation, nobody has to go to the testers. They're just available if you want them. They're just people who evaluate and certify knowledge. You'd go to the same people to qualify for admission to college. They're just people who have a reputation for evaluating one's education. Probably just a bunch of standardized tests is all they have. No, Dad. From what John tells me, they just played with him at first, and after he could read some, they played games that involved reading and math. You know, like Monopoly and cribbage. Sometimes they wandered around in the park talking about what they saw. Sounds to me like they're a bunch of swindlers, Neil interrupted. They aren't competent to judge how well educated someone is. Well, now, Mr. Campbell, since they won't get paid for years unless they detect a real problem, how are they going to swindle us? Tony, just because you don't know how they're doing it doesn't mean they aren't doing it. They're just slick or have some deal going with someone. Neil's patronizing tone sent Brianna's anger up another notch. Look here, Tony's a very well-educated man. He lives with Johnny. If Johnny were badly educated, Tony would know it right away. Well, if homeschooling is such a good idea, why are you the only one doing it? Neil countered. The only one? Brianna began laughing. There are more homeschooled kids than kids in school these days, Tony said with a smile. Since the transition, far more mothers and even a lot of fathers have decided that being home with and educating their kids is more rewarding than working for more luxuries. Now they have the choice. Women often felt trapped into having to work, even if they wanted to stay at home and be a mother. It used to be that single mothers, those who were divorced or never married, would have to have a job or go on welfare. Now they can do what's best for their children, whether that means staying home or daycare. And to sweeten the deal, they get paid for educating their own children. Amateur teachers will never do the job that professional teachers can, Neil said, sticking to his guns. Dad, you aren't going to convince us, and we aren't going to change what's been so successful, so you might as well just relax and let it go. Neil was still somewhat upset, but dinner was almost ready, and the kids would be coming in soon, so Neil went to his bedroom to wash up for supper. After he left the room, Brianna turned to Tony almost in tears. Why does he attack the way I'm teaching Johnny and Laura? I'm doing a good job with them. Everybody says so. Darling, from what you told me about his career, it was to get families in underdeveloped nations to send their children to the schools he helped organize. Now here you are, his own daughter, keeping your kids out of school. Is it any wonder he feels somewhat betrayed? Don't you worry, darling. You're doing great with the kids. Just be as tolerant as you can of your dad. Remember that he's been under a lot of stress, and he's likely to have a short temper because of it. After dinner, they went out to the playground behind the apartments and sat on some benches under the shade trees to enjoy the cool breezes of dusk. The benches gave a good view of the area where Laura was playing in a sandbox with some other children near her age, and a basketball backboard where John had joined several boys playing a half-court game. There were other parents there who knew Tony and Brianna, and they all fell into a general conversation. Brianna told them that her father had been out of the country for 15 years and was learning a lot of new things. She mentioned the trip to D.C. and how it had changed since the transition. One of the women, named Rose, had been a government worker in those days and described how she experienced the transition. Oh, honey, you should have been there. It was a hoot. We had all these VIPs in D.C., and suddenly they were just people like the rest of us. I remember how my boss reacted when we told him we were quitting. He kept telling us, hang in there, just a few more weeks. This new money thing will have blown over by then. No government can last without taxing, and so forth. But we just waved goodbye. I wonder how long he kept coming to work. It can't have been too long, because the building I used to work in was soon being used as a hotel. What did you do without work? Neil asked. At first I was kind of at loose ends, I was used to going to work every day. I guess I mostly missed my friends from work. They just scattered to the four winds. I still talk to a couple of them, but we've drifted apart now. Tell me about your husband, Rose, Brianna suggested. That doofus, he was as bad as the rest of them. He had a position with the Federal Trade Commission back then, and after about 6 months, people began to realize that no one was enforcing the regulations and laws having to do with trade anymore. Reggie was a lawyer in those days, but there was just nothing for him to do. And of course, he wasn't being paid by the government anymore, so there didn't seem to be any reason to go to the office for him either. Is that why you had to come here to live? Neil asked. Honey, I didn't have to come here. I wanted to come here. After Reggie left me, I sat at home alone for several days feeling miserable. I guess there was a lot of that going around in my circle of friends. Anyway, they called me from time to cry on my shoulder, and pretty soon I noticed that when I was helping them, I wasn't miserable about myself. I had plenty of money, what with our investments and retirement plans and all. Rose's situation was far from unique in those days, especially in Washington. Many couples whose marriages had already been under considerable stress due to the economic and social dislocations of the time found the loss of status of the main breadwinner too much to bear. It was during a time in which the divorce rate had risen sharply in the months after the transition. The courts were flooded with cases. Many of the plaintiffs were women who had felt trapped in abusive marriages by the need to support their children. After the transition, they no longer needed a husband's income. Some were men who had wanted to leave their wives but had feared the alimony or child support payments. Some had seen in the sharp increase in divorces the signs of a disintegration of the American family. But within 2 years, the divorce rate had fallen to levels well below the decades before the transition. It turned out that money problems had been one of the main causes of divorce. Especially among the poor, men no longer left their wives so their families could collect welfare, and women no longer married any man who appeared able to provide an income. There were very few arguments over how the family money was spent, since each person's money was their own. If a husband or wife chose to take some time away from work, it didn't endanger their spouse or children. Also, the pressures of work became dramatically less, and with less stress, families could be more loving. Did you get alimony or a good divorce settlement? Neil had interrupted the narrative to ask. Brianna frowned at him, but what can a daughter say when her visiting father puts his foot in his mouth? Alimony? Honey, there's no alimony anymore. All that happens in a divorce settlement is each person keeps what they own. Now, Reggie and I were joint owners of our house and the cars, so we had to decide who got which car. Reggie was a man enough to give me his half of the house. I got to give him that. Our kids had already been living on their own for several years. In fact, when Maureen left for college is when I went back to work. So anyway, I had plenty of money. Since money could no longer be transferred, there was no way alimony could be paid even if a judge were willing to grant it. Child support was no longer necessary because all the necessities were covered already, and giving food or shelter or clothes to a child was a quick source of money for anyone who had them to give. Those things that had joint ownership could be given to others or sold to others in the case of luxuries, and to pay for those actions was split between the parties. Thus, with the money aspects of divorce simplified, the other aspects of divorce, mainly child custody, could be emphasized. "And you came here because?" Tony said, making little circles with his hand to get her back to her previous point. "I came because, well, I thought I could be useful here. I just got on a bus one day and started riding all over looking for a neighborhood that was friendly and comfortable. I wanted one where the people went outdoors and talked to each other. When I came down the street over there were lots of kids playing in a playground over on the other side of Dickens there. Of course, it was just a vacant lot in those days. And there were lots of people sitting on the stoops of the apartments, and there just seemed to be a buzz of people talking friendly with each other." "So you came here because people were outside and talking?" "Yes, but I didn't realize that there were so many people outside and so many windows open because they were redecorating their apartments and didn't like the paint fumes." Rose laughed and swayed at how she had fooled herself. The others chuckled in appreciation and grinned encouragement to go on. "So I got right off that bus and went to see the apartment manager about getting an apartment. Well, they didn't really have an apartment manager, so I sort of got the job by accident. That's my apartment just off to the left as you come in the main foyer of Dickens there." "You seem to like it, even if you were fooled," Tony added. "Honey, I'm having a blast." Brianna reached across to squeeze Rose's arm and said, "And we love you here, too. You're such a good person, like that poor girl that came in last January with 3 young ones, just babies, really, and you had her all tucked in and comfortable within a few hours. It's no wonder that for a week or so she almost cried every time she saw you." "Well, who wouldn't help her, the poor baby? Her husband had been beating her, and she'd been hiding the injuries and lying to the doctor about how she got them. Then, when he threatened to kill her and the kids, she just got on the bus with them, no clothes or anything, and rode until she realized that the bus was going back to her own neighborhood. Then she got off right over there and just stood there holding a baby in her arms and 2 little ones hanging onto her skirts. I mean, it was enough to make anyone cry. How could I refuse to help her?" "How could anyone else get the chance to help her?" Tony laughed. "From what I've heard, you were out there like a flash and brought her in and had half the people in the building scurrying around to get things for her and her children before she could blink." "And you were so brave," Brianna added. "When her husband came to drag her back home, you practically chased him out of the building, threatening to have him arrested." Brianna couldn't help laughing, remembering Rose, who couldn't have been more than 5'2", confronting a man over 6 feet tall and winning easily. "Why wasn't he arrested for hurting her before she left home?" Neil asked. "Not that it's any of my business, of course." "She never pressed charges. She just let him do it," an indignant Rose said. Then, more thoughtfully, she continued, "I guess her self-confidence was just so low that she thought so little of herself and she felt she deserved it. But we're working on that. You just wait. In a few more months, well, she's still a little clingy, you know. She doesn't like to go out without me right there. I think she's still afraid her husband will be there. But I told Buster that I wanted to know if that husband of hers was anywhere in the neighborhood, and he hasn't said boo about it, so I think he must have given up on her by now." "Who's Buster?" Neil asked. "Oh, that's just what I call a computer," Rose laughed. "You know, like Buster Keaton in the old silent movies. When I first started using him years ago, he was rather stiff-faced and somber all the time, which reminded me of Buster Keaton, so I started calling him that." "Nowadays," Tony said, seizing a chance to contribute to the conversation, "the computer is much better at simulating real people. That's why they tell you in the movies which characters are people and which are just the simulations." "You mean you can't tell otherwise?" Neil wasn't so much shocked, since he was used to advances in computer technology being almost faster than one could keep up with. It was more a worry that the images he would see on the phone might not be real. He could picture talking to Brianna, or thinking it was Brianna, and having it really be just a computer. "Some people think they can tell," Rose said, "but I don't think they can. I mean, they don't even put makeup on the real actors anymore. They do all that during the editing process." The conversation continued on in a general way, skipping from one topic to another, and Neil's mind had drifted back to its chronic worries. Almost without realizing it, Neil's view of the current situation had begun to change. If the government had dissolved 15 years ago, then the current threat couldn't be the plot of an old-style totalitarian regime as in the novel 1984 with its big brother. It had to be some more subtle scheme in which powerful forces were seeking total control, mind control, if you will, of the general population. The conspiracy obviously had found ways to keep the general population passive, calm, and unresisting while their heritage of freedom was deftly stolen from them as if by a pickpocket with invisible hands. One day the people of America might wake up and realize they were in chains, but by then it would be too late to do anything about it. Surely, he thought, there were others who shared his concern. Surely he was not the only one to see the scope of the problem. Before he had left the country, there had been political movements and groups which had been sensitive to every infringement of freedom. Of course, what had seemed an infringement to one group had been accepted by the others, and the various groups couldn't agree on who was responsible for the loss of freedoms. But all these groups couldn't have simply disappeared, unless, of course, they had been suppressed. A computer system that permeated daily life as this new computer system seemed to do would make it possible to identify every person who had participated in such groups, no matter where they went. He had heard Rose casually mentioning following the cruel husband's movements using her computer. It would be possible by using such a computer system even to fake such groups, as they faked real actors in the movies just to lure from hiding those who did love freedom. Could it be that love of freedom had been eradicated already? Could all the patriots really already be in prison or dead? How could Neil even look for others who shared his beliefs without becoming a suspect? Tony might be the answer. Tony was doing historical research on the time of the transition and before. Perhaps Tony would be able to tell him what he now needed to know. But could he trust Tony? Would he be able to get Tony to talk about the right topics? And would Tony tell the truth? Was it even safe to ask questions about politics? The way to go might be to use Rose. She seemed to talk about everything else. Perhaps she could be brought to talk about politics and those small political parties. Let's see, Neil thought. Freedom of the press. There's lots of reasons for talking about newspapers. That can lead to issues of the day and editorials and politics. That's the way to get it started. Rose, I've been thinking of getting a job, Neil began, hardly noticing that he had interrupted the other's conversational thread. Are there any good jobs in want ads? Honey, there's work to be done everywhere. You just have to decide what's good for you personally. If you want to work, examine what you like to do and go with that. Rose wasn't helping. But wouldn't the want ads give me more of an idea of what kinds of things people are doing these days? I mean, for example, if I liked being a paper-shuffling bureaucrat, I'd be out of luck, wouldn't I? We don't use paper much anymore. Why, even when I was with the IRS in the old days, we were almost paperless by the time of the transition. Rose, talk about the newspapers. Neil was grinding his mental teeth in frustration. Do we even still have newspapers? I mean, if everything is paperless, did they cease to exist too? That'll get her. Oh, sure. People still like to read from paper, and newspapers are handy for other things too, sometimes. The want ads are a little different, though, said Rose, finally talking about something Neil wanted. How so? Asked Neil, willing her to elaborate. Well, they don't talk about skills so much as what needs to be accomplished. They're more in the nature of project announcements than individual work descriptions. Also, it's sometimes hard to distinguish them from the news. If people have specific skills they want to use, they go to an employment office, since it doesn't cost anything and you get personal service. It's much quicker and more efficient than the want ads. How about if I wanted to place an ad asking for work? How would I go about that? You'd go to an employment office. You wouldn't put an ad in the paper. Rose sure was stubborn. But if I did want to put an ad in the paper, how would I do it? Neil was stubborn too. Why, just call them up and tell them what you want the ad to say. If you have a particular picture or something you want in the ad, you could send them that as well. Will they print the ad with no questions asked? Neil asked skeptically. They print what they think will provide the most benefit, Tony said. If you want them to use space in their paper for something silly or worthless, you'd be out of luck. For that, you'd have to try a vanity press. That aspect of the printing business hasn't changed much. It'd be a lot easier just to put it on the internet. That's a lot quicker, and no one cares much what you say there. Of course, it'll be part of your reputation, so most folks are careful what they present. Tony had been following the conversation and had joined in on this point since it was not something he thought Rose would be interested in. What about political ads? Neil said, being a little careless due to the frustration. Political ads? Rose said. Oh, you mean those commercials and things we had on TV before the transition? Oh, we don't have those anymore. No political ads? Was it censorship? Was freedom of the press gone just like that? Why not? Neil said before he could censor himself. Tony, seeing another lecture opportunity, took this one. First, most of those ads were lies in one way or another, so none of the media today would present them to the public, since it would reduce their pay. Second, since a political party can't own money, the parties couldn't pay for their representation in any vanity press anyway. Third, and probably most important, when government stopped spending money and stopped regulating business, only a few people cared about the political parties anymore. There are other reasons as well, but those are the main ones. I'll just bet there are other reasons, Neil thought. Brianna said. "Tony, why don't you go see how the kids are doing?" Trying to head off the lecture that seemed sure to come otherwise. "Oh, they're fine, dear. They're right over there," Tony said, giving a vague gesture toward the playground swings. "How do people campaign for office without ads?" Neil asked next. Tony said, "They appear on television before the election and state the case for why they should be elected. They write position papers which are posted on their websites. The newspapers print biographies and excerpts from their position papers. The candidates appear at public debates held in various parts of the state." "What about the political parties?" Neil asked. "How are they involved?" "The parties still exist," Tony continued, "but they've changed quite a bit. The people who were most important and influential in the old parties moved on to other areas of work. The new parties' organizations are mostly composed of what you might call true believers for some social issue or other. It's fragmented most of the old parties. The Republicans' main split was between those who were Christian fundamentalists and the economic conservatives. The Democrats splintered into ethnic parties and what you might call socialists, though the latter only lasted a couple of years. The ethnic parties also lost a lot of attractiveness when they found their members could really become payers. Most of the economic discrimination they'd faced just melted away, so the emotion behind their political involvement also melted away. "You're lecturing again, Tony," said Brianna. "He sounds just like a professor when he gets off on one of his subjects." "My ignorance could benefit from a few lectures," Neil put in, not wanting a valuable source of information scared off. "So there aren't just two dominant parties anymore?" "No, there must be half a dozen important parties, but even then they're important to so few people that they influence only a tiny part of the electorate." "Don't people care who gets elected anymore?" Neil said, fearing the worst. "Most people's lives aren't really affected by the election, since the government controls so very little, and the payers only pay for good behavior. If some nut gets elected to a high office and tries to mess up, all the people below them in the high bureaucracy just ignore the stupid orders and go on doing their best." "What about judges and the police? Don't the politicians have a lot to do with who the judges are and how the police enforce the laws?" Neil said. Tony's reply was hardly comforting. "There's very little crime these days. It's almost impossible to make money from committing a crime, so few people steal, for example. Most of the crimes the police deal with are crimes of violence. Since preventing or stopping violence is so obviously beneficial, any elected official who told the police to allow violence would probably not just be ignored as an office holder, but would be considered insane. As for the judges, their caseloads are way down. There aren't any more lawsuits for money, for example. There are far fewer money crimes. There's no organized crime. There are only a few crimes for drugs or over drugs, and since the black market supply has almost disappeared. The judges who send a lot of people to jail for long sentences aren't paid as much as the judges who arrange for the guilty to change their ways. Sentencing has become far more creative than it was. State laws which used to prescribe long sentences have also been changing, since keeping people in prison for long periods is very expensive and does the victims little good. Restitution has become very important." "So," Neil said, "some radical gets elected by a tiny portion of the population and puts into office a bunch of judges with an agenda. Looks like everybody gets hung out to dry on that one." Tony, in full lecture mode, responded. "Judges serve long terms, so no one office holder gets to appoint a very large proportion of them. Also, judges get paid, too. If they're doing off-the-wall things, they won't get as much pay. For criminal cases, if the district attorneys think a judge is making judgments that are inappropriate, they won't take cases to that court. Finally, in most states, the accused has the right to a change in venue if he doesn't like the judge. If you aren't in one of those states, then you'd have to depend on the appeal process. The system isn't perfect, but then it wasn't perfect before the transition either." "Enough already, Tony. Maybe Dad doesn't mind hearing your lectures, but I've heard enough for one night. Besides, it's getting late, and we need to get the kids in." Brianna was on her feet and motioning to the children. Neil thanked Rose for educating him and told Tony that he'd heard far worse lectures when he was in college. Lying in bed, waiting for sleep to come, Neil reviewed what he'd learned. It looks like finding a freedom-loving underground will be difficult or impossible. If the political parties and voting are fading away, then the powers that be have already eliminated the most obvious threat to their staying in power. When the old government sort of evaporated, that left an enormous power vacuum, and somebody must have filled it. But who are they? They're not the administration. That's obviously just a facade. There doesn't seem to be any mention of a dominant church, so it's probably not a religious group, as would be back in the Middle East. I've noticed that these payers keep coming up whenever anyone mentions control and limitations. They're paying for the free food and housing. They pay the international traders. They pay even the judges, for crying out loud. I can just guess how fair the judges would be if their paymasters were accused of anything. This business of living in poverty is probably just a front, like in the Middle Ages when there were lots of priests who lived in poverty, but the cardinals and abbots and such lived in luxury. Perhaps that's what's happening here. If they control the computer too, in addition to doing all that paying, then I can be certain that if anyone is pulling all the strings from behind the scenes, it's a group of the payers. But how can I find out which payers are the ones in control? Tomorrow I'm going to find a newspaper and see what that has to offer. You can tell a lot about what's going on by what's allowed to be printed and what isn't. Also, I need to find a job. I don't think Brianna likes hearing the truth about her educating the kids, and if she's as stubborn as her mother, I'll never get her to let the kids go to school.
Thank you for attending today's presentation of Invisible Hand by Larry K. Mason, brought to you by GayTalkRadio.org and QueerPublicRadio.com. We hope you will join us tomorrow as the story continues at 9 p.m. Eastern Time at 6 p.m. Pacific Time. In case you've missed any of the episodes, you may listen to them by visiting QueerPublicRadio.com or by visiting Mr. Mason's website at www.nopom.info. That's www.nopom.info. Thank you for joining us, and as always, we wish the best to you and yours.